I never thought a simple massage would turn into the most uncomfortable moment of my life. But sometimes, the people we think we know best can surprise us in the worst possible way. It all started on a lazy Sunday afternoon. My husband, Mark, was away on a weekend business trip, and I had the house mostly to myself, except for my stepson, Jason, who had come home from college for a few days. At 22, he was polite, friendly, and always respectful. Or at least, that's what I believed. That day had been quiet. I'd spent the morning catching up on laundry and doing some light cleaning. Around mid-afternoon, I started feeling this tightness in my shoulders. It wasn't anything major, but it had been building for days. I mentioned it casually over lunch, not thinking much of it. Jason, sitting across from me, looked up and said, "I could help if you want. I learned some massage techniques in a sports therapy class last semester." I hesitated. It felt strange, but I brushed off the discomfort. He was just trying to help. He was family. I smiled and agreed, thinking it would be a quick, harmless gesture. I wish I could say that was the case. He told me to sit on the living room floor, and I did, still trying to shake off the weird feeling that had started creeping in. His hands were firm, and at first, it felt completely normal. He asked if the pressure was okay, and I nodded. We made small talk, about school, about how his dad was doing, and what he planned for the summer. But then something shifted. His hands paused for a second too long in places that didn't feel appropriate. The touch became slower, more deliberate. My stomach tightened, and my mind started racing. Was I overthinking? Was this just part of the massage? I wanted to believe that. I really did. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I tried to move away casually, to signal that the massage was over, but he brushed it off like I was just being silly. "You're really tense," he said, laughing lightly. But his tone had changed. It wasn't the same warm, familiar Jason I had always known. It felt off, like there was a different intent behind his actions. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to accuse him of anything, especially if I was wrong. But I couldn't ignore what my body was telling me, that deep, gut-level discomfort that you feel when a line has been crossed. I finally stood up and mumbled something about needing to take a shower. He didn't argue. He just nodded and sat back on the couch like nothing had happened. I locked the bathroom door and stood under the water for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself it was nothing. That I had misunderstood. That he didn't mean it that way. But the more I thought about it, the more my heart pounded with unease. And that's when everything started to unravel. February 2nd, I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying the moment again and again, trying to make sense of it. Was it just my imagination? Had I let my thoughts get the best of me? Or had Jason really crossed a line? The uncertainty was worse than anything. And with Mark due back the next evening, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't talk to anyone about it, not yet. I needed time to understand what had happened. The next morning, the house felt unusually quiet. Jason was already in the kitchen making breakfast when I came down. He greeted me like nothing had happened. His tone was casual, even cheerful, and for a second I almost believed I'd dreamed the whole thing. Maybe I was overreacting. But then he offered me coffee and placed his hand gently on my shoulder in a way that felt just a little too familiar. That discomfort came rushing back instantly. It wasn't about what he was doing, it was about how it felt. And it didn't feel right. I watched him carefully all morning. He didn't seem nervous. If anything, he seemed more relaxed than usual. That confused me even more. Had he done something on purpose and didn't care? Or was he really just being helpful and I had taken it the wrong way? My thoughts were all over the place. I tried to act normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the dynamic between us had changed. Something invisible but very real had shifted, and I couldn't unfeel it. Later that day, I found myself looking through old photos, family trips, birthdays, backyard barbecues, searching for signs I might have missed before. Jason had always been around. He was quiet but respectful, never caused trouble. We'd never had a weird moment before this. He even called me by my first name out of politeness and had always kept a respectful distance. That's what made this all so confusing. Nothing in our past pointed to something like this. But now, every glance, every small touch, felt loaded. I couldn't tell if he was being innocent or if he knew exactly what he was doing. And that uncertainty started to weigh on me like a stone. The worst part was not knowing how to react, how to protect myself without creating tension in the family. I didn't want to create drama without proof. But I also couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach that just wouldn't go away. And then, something happened that made the tension even worse. That afternoon, I got a call from my friend Megan. She wanted to drop by with some things for our upcoming charity bake sale. Normally, I'd have welcomed the visit, but I hesitated. I wasn't in the right headspace to host anyone. Still, I agreed. Maybe a little distraction would help me breathe and think clearly for once. When Megan arrived, I noticed Jason watching us from the hallway. Not saying anything, just watching. It was subtle, but it made me feel uneasy all over again. Megan and I sat in the kitchen chatting, trying out a few recipes. At one point, she leaned in and whispered, "Your stepson's grown up into quite the handsome young man." I smiled awkwardly and changed the subject. It wasn't her fault, she didn't know what had been happening inside my head. But her comment hit me hard. Was it really all in my head? Or was there something in his behavior that others might pick up on too if they looked close enough? Later that evening, I noticed Jason had cleaned up the backyard patio. Mark had been asking him for weeks to do it, and suddenly it was spotless. He knocked on my door and asked if I wanted to sit outside for some tea. The tone was innocent. But something about it felt like he was trying too hard. I politely said I had a headache and needed rest. I could feel his eyes linger before he finally walked away. Meanwhile, another layer of stress started building, my marriage. Mark had been working longer hours and taking more out-of-town trips. I had once chalked it up to him being career-driven, but lately, I'd started to wonder. Our conversations were brief, sometimes dry. He hardly asked how things were at home. I felt alone in my own house, and the situation with Jason only added more weight. I couldn't confide in Mark yet. I didn't want to break something that already felt fragile. Then something strange happened. I went to do laundry and found one of my scarves balled up in Jason's hamper. It was clearly mine, bright red with little silver threads, something I wore often. I froze. How had it ended up in his room? Why hadn't he said anything about it? I didn't ask him, not yet. But that single item confirmed what I feared, something was definitely wrong. And I had no idea how far it would go. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept circling back to that scarf. I had no memory of ever leaving it anywhere near Jason's room. It was always kept in my drawer, folded neatly with a few other things I rarely wore but still cared about. Finding it there wasn't just strange, it felt deliberate. A small piece of me, misplaced in a space that didn't belong to me. I didn't know what to make of it, but one thing was clear. This was no longer something I could brush off. The next day, the tension between us grew heavier. Jason acted completely normal, too normal. He offered to cook dinner, made small talk, and even asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I kept my responses short. I was trying to stay calm, but my nerves were shot. Every word, every movement from him felt like it carried some hidden meaning. I couldn't tell if he was pretending nothing had happened, or if he was waiting for something. As I sat in the living room pretending to read, I kept thinking, should I check his room? Was that crossing a line? Or had he already crossed it, and I was just playing catch-up? After about an hour of wrestling with the idea, I finally did it. He had gone out to meet a friend, and I knew I didn't have much time. His room was surprisingly clean. Not much out of place. But then I opened the small drawer on his nightstand and found something I didn't expect, my old bracelet. It was one I hadn't seen in months, something Mark had gifted me years ago. I'd assumed it was lost. But it had been here all along. I felt this strange chill run through me. It wasn't just about a massage anymore. There was a pattern, small things, little traces of me turning up in his space. Why? What was he trying to do? Just as I was about to leave his room, I heard the front door. Jason was back. My heart started pounding. I tried to stay calm, quietly closing the drawer and stepping into the hallway. I hoped he hadn't seen me come out of his room. But the look he gave me when we crossed paths said otherwise. His eyes lingered, and he tilted his head slightly, like he knew exactly what I'd been doing. He didn't say a word. Just smiled, and that smile scared me more than anything else. I walked past Jason and into the kitchen, doing everything I could to appear calm. My hands were shaking, but I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. He followed, not saying a word, just watching me. The silence between us was thick, the kind that makes your skin crawl. He poured himself a glass of water like nothing had happened. But I could feel it, he knew I'd been in his room. And worse, he didn't seem bothered by it at all. If anything, he seemed amused. That evening, Mark finally returned home. I wanted to feel relieved, but instead, I felt trapped. I had planned to talk to him, at least hint at what was happening, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the tired look on his face, or how he hugged Jason before even noticing me. He seemed distant, distracted. I kept quiet, unsure of how to even begin explaining something that sounded so impossible. But then came the twist I never saw coming. Around midnight, after Mark had gone to bed, I was in the laundry room folding clothes when I noticed an envelope slipped under the door. No name, no writing on the front, just a plain, unmarked envelope. I opened it slowly. Inside were printed screenshots. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. But as my eyes adjusted, the images became clear. It was a series of pictures. Of me. Around the house. In the kitchen. On the back patio. Even one of me sleeping on the couch. My heart dropped. These weren't random moments, these were private, quiet parts of my life. Someone had been watching me. Documenting me. The angles made it obvious they had been taken with a phone from within the house. I felt cold all over. There was only one person who could have taken them. Jason. This wasn't just awkward behavior anymore. This was intentional. This was obsessive. And now I wasn't just uncomfortable, I was scared. I rushed to Mark's room and stood by the door for several seconds, debating whether to wake him. But something stopped me. A strange voice in my head whispered, "What if he doesn't believe you?" My hands trembled as I clutched the envelope. How could I prove this? Jason was smart, and from the looks of it, calculated. And if he had been bold enough to take these photos and leave them for me to find, what else was he capable of? The walls of my own home suddenly felt unfamiliar. Unsafe. I thought I knew my stepson. I thought I knew my marriage. But now, I wasn't sure about anything. And then, just as I turned to walk away from Mark's door, I heard Jason's voice behind me, soft, almost playful. "Couldn't sleep either," he said with a smile. And that's when I realized, the real nightmare had just begun. I stood frozen in the hallway, gripping the envelope in my hand, heart thudding so loud it felt like Jason could hear it. His voice still echoed in my ears as calm, too calm for the moment. He stood there in the dim light, barefoot, arms folded across his chest like this was just another casual conversation. But I could see something else in his eyes now. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't guilt. It was control. Like he was 10 steps ahead of me, and he knew it. "I found this," I said, holding up the envelope. My voice was shaking, but I tried to sound steady. "Care to explain?" He looked at it and let out a quiet laugh. I thought you might. Guess you really were curious about what's been going on. I didn't know what answer I expected, but it wasn't that. There was no denial. No pretending. Just this strange confidence, like he was daring me to react. You've been taking pictures of me in the house? I asked, my voice rising now, anger bubbling beneath the fear. Why? Jason leaned against the wall, his face still calm. Don't you ever feel like you're invisible around here? Like no one really sees you? Not even Mark. But I do. I notice the things he forgets. The little things. I felt sick. He wasn't just crossing lines, he had never seen them to begin with. At that moment, I heard footsteps of Mark, awake now and coming down the hall. He looked at the two of us and asked what was going on. My hands were still trembling as I handed him the envelope. He opened it slowly, and I watched his face change with every picture he saw. Jason stayed silent, his arms now dropped to his sides. Mark didn't say a word. He just turned to Jason and said, "Go pack your things. You're leaving this house." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, argue, try to spin it somehow. But he didn't. He just nodded and walked off toward his room. It was like he had expected this moment all along. When Jason was gone the next morning, the silence in the house was suffocating. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. Not yet. Because there was still one thing bothering me. Later that day, while Mark was out running errands, I looked through the rest of the envelope, and that's when I found it. A final picture tucked behind the others. It wasn't of me. It was of Jason and another woman. Taken outside a cafe. Her hand on his arm. Her face turned just enough for me to see who it was. Megan. My closest friend. The one who'd casually joked about Jason being handsome. Suddenly, everything made sense in a much darker way. And just like that, the real story wasn't over, it had only just started. You said, continue from where the climax left off and write 500 words wrapping up the story. This part should provide a satisfying resolution, answer any remaining questions, and conclude subplots. Leave the audience with key takeaways or reflections, making the ending memorable and engaging. Naturally, include to keep the SEO optimization strong. End the story now in natural way. Keywords also do not make any headings. Only write story in paragraphs. Also keep the wording simple in natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content which can affect YouTube policy. ChatGPT said, I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the photo of Jason and Megan. My mind raced, trying to connect all the dots. Had this been going on the whole time? Was she somehow involved in all of this? The memory of her comment, how she casually mentioned Jason had grown up into a handsome young man, suddenly felt loaded. At the time, it was harmless. But now, it took on an entirely different meaning. Later that evening, I called her. I didn't say anything about the picture right away. I just asked about her visit, if she'd talked to Jason recently. She hesitated. That silence told me more than any words could. When I finally brought up the photo, she didn't deny it. She just sighed and said, it was a mistake. One I regret. Apparently, it had started a few months back, when Jason came home for spring break. She claimed it was short-lived, just a flirtation, but I could tell from her voice that it had gone deeper than that. What hurt the most wasn't just Jason's betrayal, it was the realization that someone I trusted so deeply had been hiding something this serious. Megan and I had shared years of friendship, late-night talks, laughter, and support. And in the middle of all that, she'd been sneaking around with my stepson. There was no fixing that kind of damage. When Mark returned, I showed him the final photo. His face went pale. He didn't say much, just shook his head and muttered, unbelievable. We didn't talk much the rest of the night. The weight of everything, Jason's behavior, the photos, Megan, had left us emotionally drained. But one thing was certain, something in our marriage had shifted. For the first time in a long while, Mark really saw how alone I had felt. And he started trying, really trying. He cut down on travel, made time for us again, and slowly, piece by piece, we began rebuilding what had been falling apart for years. As for Jason, we didn't see him again. Mark made it clear he needed help, and until he got it, he wasn't welcome back into our home. I didn't know if he ever really understood how far he had crossed the line. I hoped he'd eventually get the support he needed, but I also knew I had to protect my peace first. Looking back, what started as an uncomfortable moment during a simple massage turned into a storm that shook my home, my marriage, and my friendships. It was a harsh reminder that sometimes, betrayal comes from the places you least expect. And trust, once broken, can take a long time to heal. But through it all, I found strength I didn't know I had. I learned that silence can be dangerous, and that speaking up, even when it's scary, is often the first step toward protecting yourself. This was more than just a story about discomfort or infidelity. It was about seeing the truth, even when it hurts, and choosing not to ignore it. 22.